So first of all, welcome from myself. I'm William Wintstone, one of Metsana founders, and alongside me I have Jonathan Males and Catherine Bond. And Jonathan and I will be leading this session on anxiety first aid. And our background is as performance psychologists, and managing anxiety and dealing with exceptional situations is at the heart of what we do as performance psychologists. And so over the past 4 weeks, as we live through these extraordinary times, we have been bringing to bear some of these skills to help people in different ways. Now, each of us has an individual responsibility to manage ourselves as best as we can to help people around us. Most of the people we talk to on our calls are leaders, either formal leaders or having an impact on people around them. And the thing is about leadership is that our mood casts a really long shadow, either a really positive shadow to calm people around us, or a less positive shadow. Hence the individual responsibility that we all have to manage ourselves really well, because it has a big impact on ourselves and it has a big impact on people around us. And so this session is all about managing anxiety. And anxiety is particularly important because it's like an accelerant for all the other emotions. If you're feeling anxious, you interpret the world differently. And we're both going to look at in this session acute anxiety and your anxiety patterns. And these can make a big difference to your happiness, to your resilience, and everybody you lead and you live with. So in terms of the structure of today, we're just going to have 3 simple building blocks. We want to make the session really practical, really simple, so that you've got something you can take away and use and apply. So first of all, we're going to be looking at the natural side of anxiety, that it's actually a really helpful thing. If we use it well, this is very helpful. It's a natural response. We're going to do 6 steps to increase your control, and then we're going to look at building a first aid routine for your anxiety. So let's first of all look at anxiety as a natural response to threat. Anxiety is your radar system, and it's designed to predict future threat. It's actually a wonderful evolutionary strength. It enables us to look into the future and use our intelligence from past patterns and experiences and combine it with our imagination with what this might mean in the future. This enables us to see further over the horizon than the other animals that we're competing with. So at best, this is a really, really powerful thing. However, it is not the most accurate, scientifically calibrated device. And we'll explore that a little bit more as we go through the session. But let's look at some of the things which are likely to set off our anxiety in the current situation. As we know, many people aren't feeling physically safe. People's health and financial security are threatened. And a really useful model to help us understand this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And broadly, the lower down the pyramid, the more powerful and the greater the need of these factors and motivators. And we're looking at physiological and safety needs, both of which are threatened. And to some extent, some of our higher order needs are threatened. And the other thing which is around here is that it's not a really concrete threat. The threat here is variable, it's mainly invisible, and that in itself is likely to make our radar wobble around and determine the threat in an inexact way. If you look at the higher order needs, the self-actualization and the esteem needs, these are what you might call social psychological needs. And we've also got another model which explains why people are at times feeling quite so troubled. And this is from a guy called David Rock, whose SCARF model powerfully sets out some of the basic needs which we have, which drive us. In good times, they drive us very positively. When they're overused or overdeveloped, they can drive us to high anxiety. So first of all, status. We need to know where we are in different pecking orders. We need to know that we belong. Secondly, certainty. And this has been strongly threatened because there is so much uncertainty about risk, about finance, about health. Autonomy. Well, autonomy simply means how much control and choice do I have? Clearly, people's physical autonomy has been changed, has been limited, and that is having a big impact on people's sense of I can do what I want to do. Relatedness, well, lockdown clearly means isolation for a lot of people. Working together in groups typically is a very tribal activity which enables people to connect and see people in all their families. And then finally, fairness. And especially when people are actually being hit with this illness, it can strike very strongly about the unfairness and the randomness of this situation. But also when people's jobs are being affected, that can have a very big impact on people's sense of fairness. When these needs are threatened, we then typically respond by fight or flight. And when we respond by fight or flight, typically our anxiety is raised, our decision-making is impaired, we're less able to stay calm and have the impact we want. So all of these factors, both Maslow's and the SCARF model, really explain why it's completely natural that you and people around you are likely at times to have heightened anxiety. Now, what to do about it? Well, there's a principle here. And first of all, if you can understand which of these triggers are having the biggest impact upon you, then you can actually intervene and have a more effective response. Secondly, there's a principle here which is neatly encapsulated by, you probably haven't done this for a little while, but when you used to fly, the instruction about the oxygen masks was fit your own oxygen mask first, and then you can look after the other people around you. So, with that in mind, we're going to be sharing with you, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan for the aspects, the first aspects of our first aid kit. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, William. So we want to share with you 6 practical things that you can do to increase your control over how you're feeling in these situations. And we've framed this as a first aid kit. And our first aid kit's got 6 different things in it, which we'll talk about in more detail. The first one we're calling avoid the oncoming bus. Checking in to make sure your radar is working, because as William said, anxiety is a radar. It is almost certainly faulty at this stage. We want to talk about shifting perspective, about self-talk and being aware of what you're saying to yourself and the impact that has. The importance of self-compassion, being kind to yourself in this time. Oh, my slide's gone haywire here. And then about attending to your body, because we can do a lot physically, which will help how we feel emotionally. So let's look at the first one of these. Now, William said that anxiety helps us see around corners. It helps us understand what's there. One of the things we do need to be really careful of is, are there real threats going on at the moment? Because as we all know, the world is going a bit crazy at the moment. So just because you're feeling anxious doesn't mean that you're being neurotic right now. Really important to just think, okay, if I'm feeling worried, if I'm feeling upset, are there really practical things I need to do? Do I need to take some practical action to deal with some of these threats? And if so, take that action. Anxiety is there for a reason. You know, it's good to listen to it and take action. If there's nothing that you can do, or if there's not a real threat, then it really helps to pay attention to what you can control and what you can influence, and notice what are the things that you can't influence or can't control. It's very easy to get focused on all sorts of things that are outside our influence, outside our control. That's no good. Bring it into the things that are real, the things that you can do something about, control the controllables. Be really focused. And if there's a real threat, if you're standing in the road and there's a bus coming towards you, don't stand there feeling worried. Jump out of the way. Do something practical if there's a real threat in your environment or in your world right now. So as we said, anxiety is like a radar, and it's designed to spot future threats, not to deal with current challenges. If there's a real challenge in our life, you know, if you think about our ancestors facing danger, if there was really a dangerous animal in front of them, they didn't feel anxious, they did something else. They ran or they killed the animal, but they didn't sit there feeling anxious. In these times, our radar can get faulty and we can get really skewed. We can be hypersensitive, we become hypervigilant, we can be focused on all sorts of things which aren't really there. So we start to distort reality. Our radar goes from something that's scanning for proper threats to becoming hypervigilant. If I switch analogies for a minute, it's a little bit like having a smoke alarm in your kitchen. You want the smoke alarm to go off at the right level when there's a fire. If it only goes off when your house is burning down, then your smoke alarm is set at too high a level. But if your smoke alarm goes off when someone's having a barbecue 3 blocks away, then it's faulty as well. So it's about trying to calibrate what level of threat am I sensing? Where is my smoke alarm set? And is it realistic? Is it sensible? Is it helping me? Or am I being hyper-vigilant? Am I over-responding to too many things that aren't real threats to me right here and right now? Third part of our first aid kit is to be really aware of the importance of shifting perspective. Let me explain what I mean by that. We can always choose where we put our attention, and we can put our attention in a number of different ways, some of which are going to be helpful, some of which aren't when we're feeling anxious. So being aware of where am I putting my attention, how am I viewing the world, where is really important. So as we've talked about, anxiety is a threat to tell us what's over the horizon, what's in the future. So if I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about the future, it's likely that I'll feel more anxious because I'm more likely to get caught up in imagining the future. I can't predict it. So if my orientation is very much in the future, that might be feeding my anxiety. So a really simple shift in perspective is to come into the present moment. What's happening right now? What's true for me right now in this moment? In the very short term, what do I really know about? So this chimes with the previous point about controlling the controllables. Let me bring my attention to what I can control and what is happening right now, and not spend too much time casting off into the future. The other shift in perspective is towards other people, away from myself. When we get anxious, it's very easy to get self-obsessed. It's very easy to get locked in my own thoughts, my own worries, my own emotions, and that becomes self-perpetuating, get locked into a cycle of my own worries. So simply shifting perspective and asking, who else am I with? Who can I help? How can I actually extend myself? How can I extend my care to look after someone else? It's a really powerful switch, because when we're looking after someone else, it's much harder to be self-absorbed with what's going on for me. That's the third really important perspective shift. The other one is to notice what it is I'm grateful for. So rather than being focused on lack, focused on negativity, focused on what's not here and what I don't have, can I shift perspective into what I do have? And even for what I have isn't very much, can I be grateful for what I do have? It's a beautiful sunny day today. The daffodils are out here in Britain. There are some things which are very easy to feel grateful for right here and right now. So just shifting perspective in that way can really help. So there's 3 ways in which our perspective can get locked in a way which makes anxiety worse, and 3 ways in which we can shift our perspective to get free of some of that debilitating anxiety. I'm going to hand over to William now. They're the first 3 parts of our first aid kit.
So that went backwards. There we go. The fourth part is about what you're saying to yourself. And all of us have a fairly constant internal dialogue going on. And our internal dialogue is either likely to be helpful, supportive, or at times it can magnify the threats that we're facing. Now, each of us will tend to have patterns of how we talk to ourselves. And my hunch is that all of us on this call will know where your patterns are at good times and where they're likely to go when you're more stressed. And so a couple of questions. Is the way you're talking to yourself a helpful coach or an unhelpful critic? If you're very prone to self-criticism, and that likely gets heightened in uncertainty, that in itself can be a bit depressive or making and undermining. Okay. Secondly, are you soothing or scaring yourself? If you're prone to actually scaring yourself, that heightens the anxiety. So there's a strong connection about how you talk to yourself and how your radar functions. In a way, how you talk to yourself is the software by which you're interpreting what's over the horizon. And knowing what your pattern is simply can mean, I know in the last few months, there was a small patch where I was probably being a bit more self-critical. And just noticing that suddenly provided a bit of distance and meant that actually I felt a lot of relief and I felt more confident in the particular situation I was dealing with. So notice your pattern, and simply by noticing it, it gives you a bit more power. And especially if you can add a little bit more from the positive side about being a helpful coach or soothing yourself. So the next area, number 5, is actually about self-compassion. And at the heart of this is, how do you handle your emotions? Now, that's an enormous subject, but there are some core principles here about acknowledging your emotion. And the process of acknowledging your emotion in a fairly neutral way, naming, I feel this, I feel anger, I feel a bit anxious. That is a very powerful way of allowing us to process and move on. And just by way of contrast, we've got a bit of an axis here. It's likely that you may again have a pattern. And if your pattern is a little bit or a lot more on the resist and push away side of your emotions, that in itself can keep them stuck. And it can mean that actually anxiety actually comes up from underneath. Okay. So in the short term, resisting emotion can feel great, but longer term, it's likely to come back to you. On the other side, if you're very aware of your emotion, it can have the potential to dwell and obsess on them. And neither of them are likely to be that helpful. And they're both likely in different ways to magnify anxiety. Whereas just noticing if you've gone in either of those two directions, just bringing yourself back a little bit will make a big difference and help you be able to acknowledge and move on. And whatever it is you're feeling, beating yourself up for it is not going to help. The 6th area is about how you use your body physically to actually manage your emotion and your anxiety. We hold all of our emotions in our bodies. They don't just reside up in our heads. And so actually what we do physically makes a big, big difference to actually allowing emotion to flow through us. So physical exercise makes a big difference. Get out, schedule. It doesn't have to be a long bit of exercise, but changing what you're doing and getting outside if you can be very, very helpful. Releases endorphins, changes the mood. And there's something here about any movement is valuable, because if I'm locked in an emotional state, and especially an anxiety state, I'm actually holding that physically. So shifting my muscular pattern makes a difference. Stretching can make a big difference too. Meditation can also be really, really helpful. So do that regularly, maybe every 50 minutes, move, schedule it in your day. And this connects to one of the things we looked at in previous webinars, was about how you plan for working remotely. And a core part of that is, what's your schedule? So I'm going to hand back to Jonathan to look at, okay, so we've got these tools, what are you going to do about them?
Thanks, William. So the important thing here is to start to tune in a little bit and understand more about what are the situations that are going to trigger your feelings of anxiety. Because it's very likely that there are going to be specific times of the day, specific events, specific situations that are going to be worse for you, or going to be more likely to be a big trigger for you feeling worried or upset. So it's really important to understand what are they? Are there particular times that are stressful for you? Perhaps it's the end of the day when you feel like you haven't finished everything. Perhaps it's the start of the day when you're worried about the daunting list of everything that you're going to get done. Maybe it's at the end of trying to get to sleep when it's most stressful for you, your mind is racing. Are there specific events? Do you have a regular meeting with someone that's particularly stressful for you? Is there a particular situation that you need to deal with? Perhaps conflict, perhaps situations where you've got to make a decision. Start to tune in and think about what are the types of situations where you're primed. And this links right back to the start of the session where we talked about those different needs, particularly around safety, around status, around certainty, around autonomy. Think about the times for you when those particular needs might be most under threat, and understand what those situations are. Because that's the first stage in you starting to build your own routine, your own set of new habits, which will help you respond differently, rather than going down the pattern that we've talked about, where you're triggered and you either go into that fight or flight response, neither of which is particularly healthy. So we want to think about what are the ways in which you can interrupt the habit, interrupt the pattern that you've become used to, and set yourself off in a different direction. And that different direction is one in which you're acknowledging the emotions that you're feeling, but you're not letting yourself become obsessed by them, and you're switching on the more conscious, the rational part of our brains, and allowing yourself to be much more calm, much more resourceful in how you proceed. So I know, for example, William, you had a bit of an insight about, you want to share your example around?
Yeah, typically in ordinary life, I would look at news fairly frequently every day. I realized that was becoming a big anxiety trigger for me, and starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by the waves of bad news. Currently, I look at, there's got to be a very high threshold for me to look at the news, and it works really, really well.
Great. We're going to share with you 3 examples of the sorts of things that you could do. Sorry, this screen has got a mind of its own. 3 things that you could do. Sorry. William, do you want to click the slides back? My remote control's going crazy.
Yeah.
It's one of the troubles with sharing screens. So I wanted to share with you 3 specific tactics that you might want to interrupt that link to 3 of the ingredients in the first aid kit. So the first one relates to this idea that our radar can get faulty. So the trigger in this one would be noticing that I'm dwelling on worries. I'm noticing, my trigger is I'm catching myself, I'm noticing that I'm obsessing, I'm worrying about things that aren't real, that haven't happened yet. So instead of that, instead of focusing on something that hasn't happened yet, I could make a different choice and take a simple action that will help someone else right now. So see the process? I'm being really clear about, for me, what's the trigger? And the trigger is I've noticed that I tend to obsess and dwell on things that haven't happened yet. I realize that my radar is getting skewed, it's hypersensitive. So instead of focusing on that, I'll take a simple action, I'll switch perspective, and I'll say, what's something practical I could do to help someone else right now? Yeah. Second one, and again, this is another example of shifting perspective. So here the trigger is I'm feeling overwhelmed. So one of those moments when it all is just getting too much. Maybe that's a particular situation for me in my working day, or maybe it's just a sense that I get of it's all too much. And maybe my pattern now is to try and push those feelings away. I'm dealing with it by trying to push it away, but actually the more I push it away, the more overwhelming it all gets. That's not working. I need to do something different. So the something different is, okay, I'm going to acknowledge how I'm feeling. So instead of fighting and pushing those emotions away, I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to simply say to myself, right now I feel overwhelmed. Right now I feel really sad about what's going on. Right now I just don't know what to do. And the very act of acknowledging the emotion, of naming it out loud in particular, takes it from something that's deep in the back of my old primitive fight or flight brain. It takes it from behind my eyes and it takes it out and makes it an object. Now I am talking about my emotion. I'm reflecting on my emotion. I'm acknowledging my emotion. And that act of acknowledgement is super, super important. The very act of acknowledging the emotion means that now I, my sensible, adult, human-brained person, is acknowledging a particular response I happen to be having. And that is fundamentally different from me being overwhelmed and that response, that emotion having me. Can't emphasize that enough. So the acknowledgement is really important. So instead of trying to push it away and ignore it, I'm naming it, I'm putting it out there as a thing that I can deal with. And now I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to do something physical. I'm going to shift state. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to stretch. I'm going to put some music on and dance. I'm going to do something to get myself out of my head where I've been obsessing. I'm simply now someone who happens to have some feelings, and I happen to also be having a good dance. Yeah? Very different way of dealing with it than simply trying to push the feelings away. Third one, avoiding the oncoming bus. So perhaps I might reflect and realize that actually a lot of my response to the world at the moment is to go into flight mode and pretend it's not happening and to just get complacent, pretend go into denial. So I might be getting really complacent, wandering around the shops and visiting people. And I might realize that's not actually a good response. So instead of just telling myself that everything will be okay, which might be my current pattern, I will check that I'm following the recommendations for social distance and hygiene. I'll be an adult about this. I'll acknowledge the threat and I'll do something about it rather than just allow myself to hide, pretend that it's not there. Because we do live in a world that's dangerous at the moment. And everyone who's got faulty radars, now this is the time you've been waiting for because there are plenty of real threats out there. So avoiding the oncoming bus, be alert to those times where it might be that you're dealing with anxiety by pretending it's not there, telling yourself everything's going to be okay. And that might not be a great strategy right now when you might need to do some things that are real to avoid those buses that are out there. Okay, so there's 3 suggestions. We've got a little bit of time now. It'd be great to hear any feedback or any observations or any questions that you might have based on what we've talked about. You'll need to unmute yourself because we've muted everyone at this stage of the call. It'd be great to hear any observations, what's landed with you. Rebecca, you look like you're about to say something. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering. Well, I was a couple of minutes late joining. I didn't know whether you'd identified a code for talking or not. So
not yet. Far away.
Polite, Jonathan. But William, Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I particularly wanted to join the Zoom conversation because I've just noticed with clients that I'm coaching sort of heightened levels of anxiety. So I was always sort of looking out for approaches and how to have those conversations. Just really like to get your view. When you're working with a client with the 6 steps, do you pretty much sort of work through step by step, or do you sort of just briefly unpack them and allow them to sort of identify the ones that really resonate with them?
Well, personally, I don't use the 6 steps in that way. I would simply be tuning in with the client about, or if it's somebody I was managing, what's the pattern here? There's likely to be a core pattern or behavior that bubbles to the surface. And based on that, and also based on what the person I'm working with may already have some habits which are really good, but they're just not using them right now. So I would, one, try and help them use something they already know, but maybe need to deploy it better. But two, I'd really try and tune into make it as simple as possible in a sort of experiment. So they give it a go for a few days, see what helps.
Thank you. I guess it's that sort of coming from my background is as a coach. So I guess as a coach, you are often less directive in terms of, you're often more self-directive in terms of offering the information and allowing them to choose where they want to go. And I guess what you're doing is sort of, tuning in, keeping it sort of simple for them and sort of offering something that way.
It's a good point. For me, I'd agree with William. I wouldn't work through this as a system, from 1 to 6. But I'm not sure there's always time for, in these sorts of situations, being self-directed. It's a little bit like, if you came across someone on the road and they were bleeding out from a cut artery, you wouldn't offer them the first aid kit and say, what would you like to choose from here? You grab the bandage and you put the pressure on the bleeding wound. So I do think maybe there are times here when it's okay to be more, to offer things to people more so than purely being reactive.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Any other feedback? It'd be good to know what's landed well from you here. What's your takeaways from what you've heard today?
Hi, Jonathan. It's Kenny.
Hi, Kenny.
I think, thank you very much for the presentation. I think from my side, one of the big things there is understanding how anxiety really magnifies all of the other emotions, because I think that's been one of the biggest things here has been, and I suffer from anxiety on a periodically, and I think that's been one of the biggest things here is actually that I take away from the session is actually realizing, okay, all those other things that I've felt and have gone through have been as a result of that anxiety level. And clearly with this one, with it being an invisible thing that we're all fighting, that's just going to continue as we continue to go into uncharted territories. So yeah, thank you very much for that insight.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about anxiety being a response to specific triggers, which it is, but there is also the sense of a generalized anxiety that people can feel as well. It's much harder to pin down, but I think, and that comes from, I think, this point about basic safety is under threat. When there's an invisible threat out there, we can't see the virus, we don't know who's going to be next to get sick. That in itself becomes a trigger for that generalized sense of worry.
And trying, and I think one of the challenging things in running a business right now is trying to settle that anxiety with our employees whilst we're still in uncharted waters. So clearly the more information you can give and the more routine that information going out, the better. But on the other hand, we're all in a position where we don't really know. Don't really know quite what next week, let alone next month, is going to look like. So therefore, I think it's very difficult to map out how you try and positively impact your employees and reduce their anxiety levels in terms of there's employees anxious about jobs, anxious about incomes, and all of those other elements.
I think you make really good points, Kenny. I think that the 6 steps that we talked about, many of them are really useful principles about how you communicate with your teams and your whole organizations. Because, regular communication, controlling the controllables, soothing, coaching, paying attention to what is hard data and what isn't. Some of these, I think, are really good principles. They do relate to, so Jonathan and Catherine ran a couple of webinars on leading through crisis and leading remote teams. And those principles are all, the good news is the principles about leading through crisis and the principles about managing your own anxiety are consistent. So it's all part of the same piece.
Yeah.
I've used the analogy before with people that seems to go down well, that everyone wants a suspension bridge right now. Everyone wants a nice clear bridge that will take you well over all the troubles and into the distance and land you safely on the other shore. And it's really tempting as a leader to want to provide that for people, because that's what people are asking for. But there are no suspension bridges now, and the best we can do is offer people stepping stones. So step at a time, hopefully in the right direction, but let's make sure that each step we take is the best step we can take now. But there are no easy answers. There's no bridge over the troubled water here. We've got to be willing to just take a step at a time. Good. Any more for any more? Hi, Hetty.
Just hi there. Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I love the build on on the other talks. Just something from my experience of coaching clients at the moment is that very often they have several different voices all going at the same time in their heads. So one head of marketing in a frontline manufacturing organization involved in manufacturing equipment for the current crisis. She says, you know, she's managing to be really kind of up there during the week, and then all the other voices come piling in, the anxiety and everything at the weekend. And so she's on a bit of a roller coaster, which relates to your last talk with the thing. And yeah, one client said that they were expending a lot of energy, as it were, with that internal battle. You know, part of them's anxious, part of them feels resourced, part of them wants to be a good leader, part of them wants to run away and hide. And it's all happening at the same time. And I found it, or she found it, the client found it useful to sort of start to name all the different voices and to separate them out and to get them talking to each other, and sort of just bringing, like you said, bringing some clarity into the muddle. Cool. So I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you. Thanks, Eddie.
And the body, so important. Yeah.
It doesn't just carry our heads around, it does a lot more than that.
So, well, a big thank you for all this. This is really, really, really useful. If I was to pick one takeaway for me tonight, is the I quite like the idea of choosing focus and then doing a bit of a sidestep, looking after someone else. Once we have acknowledged the emotion, yeah, I find it extremely useful. That and the analogy of the oxygen mask, which I use, but I had not thought of applying it this way, which is, so I thank you for that tonight, really. The other comment I am making is that right now, with people being locked down, obviously looking after your body and exercising can be a challenge. Well, exercising can be done, but going outside for a walk and taking some fresh air is probably what is missing. So thanks for sort of useful reminders that just stretching, dancing, doing something so you don't stick to holding this in your body is useful. So.
And laughing, humor.
Laughing.
Indeed.
I've been fascinated at how many memes are going around that are really, really funny, and I now realize, of course, there's a purpose to that. We need to laugh right now. We need to find space to laugh.
Yep. Good.
I'll just go back one slide, Jonathan,
Yeah.
because, and let me just do that. So if you've been on one of our webinars before, we're really happy to send out the material. Just add your name to the mailing list, and we will send you the material and send you future newsletters which come out once every month or so. And if there's anything else you'd like to find out from us more, then please let us know, either on the chat or email us separately. Anything else from you, Jonathan?
No, I hope that's been useful. Good to have some new faces or new people on the call, plus some familiar folks as well. So I hope it's been useful for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
That's really good. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
No worries.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Really terrific.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hetty. Good to see you again.
Bye, Hetty.
Yeah, see you soon.